Welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast. I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Thank you for joining us as we uncover how stories are one of the most important aspects of your business. We'll talk about struggles, victories, and how you can utilize strategic storytelling to inspire those around you to action. Enjoy this episode. Imagine for a moment that you've worked your guts out to accomplish a goal. Blood, sweat, tears. This is everything you've studied for, worked for, sacrificed for, and the day finally arrives where your dreams come to fruition. This is it. You've arrived. But also on the same day you achieve your lifelong dream, you're faced with an absolute horrific nightmare. I'm going to dive into this exact scenario with my guest today because today I'm joined by Mike Bassett, who is the owner of the Bassett Firm and author of The Man in the Ditch. Welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast, Mike.
Matt, thank you so much. I love the introduction.
Awesome. I am very excited for this conversation. I've been literally counting down the days for our talk today. And I'll mention to you, Mike, and also to everyone listening, I go through a lot of books. I spend a lot of time on planes flying to speaking engagements, so I get a lot of time to read. And I go through a ton of books. I believe last year I went through over 100. This year I've been tearing through books. And I'm serious in saying this. The Man in the Ditch is by far the best book I've read all year.
Thank you.
It was riveting. I don't even think I put the book down. I started reading and I started and ended within a couple hours, and it was phenomenal. It was very riveting. So thank you so much for putting that out into the world.
Happy to do it.
So let's dive in to a lot of the different things that you cover in the book. And I just want to start from the beginning. You actually start the book out by saying, to understand a person, and I mean really truly see him, you need to know his story. So let's start in the beginning and tell us a little bit about the culture shock from moving from Chicago to El Paso. And then I also want you to dive into the impact that Herbie and Jean had on your life.
Wow. Okay, so let's go back. The year is 1961. I am born to a woman who was married and whose husband has left, a 40-year-old woman. Who has a child. And about 6 weeks after I'm born, my mom moves down to El Paso and meets some folks by the name of Herb and Jean Bassett. My mother ends up working with Jean Bassett at the El Paso Telephone Company. My mom was diagnosed with what we know today as bipolar disorder. I think back then it was called manic depression, which meant that there were times she literally could not care for me, and Herbie and Jean would take me in from time to time. And about the time I was 4 or 5, they essentially said to my mom, listen, we love helping you out. Her name was Minnie. Minnie, we love helping you out, but this is not fair for this little boy to go back and forth. And when I was 9, my mother made a decision that I think is probably one of the bravest things that anybody can do and probably one of the most heartbreaking. And she gave me up for adoption. So I go to live with Herbie and Jean full time. And so you have to understand Herbie and Jean, they're the yin and the yang. My mom, God rest her soul, was a hippie. She was an absolute hippie beatnik. She was an artist. She was she loved to entertain people. My dad was retired military, and where my mom was psychedelic with the world, my dad's world was black and white. So I grew up in a household with very diverse parents. Also, I was the 5th youngest of 5 kids. So by the time I come along at 5 or 6, my old man is 50 years old. So
Wow.
Think about that. If you're a young parent with a 4-year-old, imagine doing it when you're 50.
I can't even imagine. My youngest is 3. I'm in my mid-30s. I can't even imagine that.
And so the great thing is I grew up essentially as an only child because almost everybody's moved out of the house. And early on, I just sort of pick up this worldview from Herbie and Jean that's a mixture of Tony Robbins and probably a Marine drill sergeant. My mom always told me that I could do anything I wanted, that, nothing could hold me back. My dad was the message, listen, the world owes you nothing. If you want to do something, you need to go out and make it happen yourself. And so it was that combination that sort of launched me early into the world and my desire to be an entrepreneur and to realize that I liked working because I'd like to have the financial independence.
Wow. So I'm fascinated by that. So your mother starts to build a relationship with her and Jean.
Yep.
And you're going back and forth, and they're the ones that recommend, hey, why doesn't he just stay here? So they were the ones that initially offered that up.
Yeah. And so if you knew my old man, he was sort of a juxtaposition. At some points, he was very, very cynical and very much had a worldview that sometimes probably was not politically correct. But on the other hand, was one of the most generous, egalitarian people I ever met. And as told to me when I got older, my dad, Herbie, called Minnie and said, Minnie, it's not fair to this little boy. He needs to be one place or the other. And so that's the kind of guy he is, who is 50 years old, who has raised 4 kids, that is now going to take on a rambunctious 5-year-old.
Wow. Wow. That is unbelievable. One of the things that you mentioned in the book, which as soon as I read this, I busted out laughing. And I think this really gives us a little bit of an understanding regarding Herbie. You say, so while my friends were gifted cars and lavish vacations from high school graduation, I got one of Herbie's firm slaps on the back and a gruff congratulations. You have completed the minimum education standard for the state of Texas.
And
so
I still remember that conversation in the front yard.
That's so funny. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think that really speaks to the work ethic that this man had and raised you in. So tell us about being raised in that environment. Obviously, that has paid off in large dividends, especially in the world of law. But tell us a little bit about the work ethic and what you got from that.
Well, I didn't realize it then, but as I look back on it now, one of the things that Herbie taught me was that there is so much in life that you can accomplish simply by showing up and doing your best every day. And some days your best is really good, and some days your best is just about as best as you can do. But is that consistency and persistency, Matt, that I think I adopted early on. I remember my first real job where I actually got a paycheck, although I started working at about 9 or 10 mowing lawns, was working at a Wiener Schnitzel restaurant. And I remember in the summers working 80 or 100 hours a week. Well, one, because I was young and I had a lot of energy. But two, I found that if you were there for people and you showed up, it's amazing the opportunities that became available when you were there.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So you're working like crazy. You have this incredible work ethic, and then you start getting interested in law. How does that pass on to law school? And also, how in the world did you even get interested in law in the first place?
So the answer to the second question first, it's sophomore year of high school. So it would have been 1977. I'm taking a government class like everybody in high school took in 1977 in the state of Texas. And we were studying the judicial branch. And so we were going to have a mock trial. And so the teacher said, okay, it's going to be a murder case. We're going to have somebody that's going to play the prosecutor, somebody play the defense lawyer. And I volunteered to play the defense lawyer, and I just fell in love with it. The ability to sit and unpack things and to argue things and to look at things differently, really, I was bitten by the bug, Matt. And at that point, I realized I want to be a lawyer. So that happens in 1977. I graduate from Cornell, and I go to UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso. Flying Miners, 1966 NCAA champions, but I'm not living in the past, Matt. I'm all about the present. Awesome. I ended up taking this class as a freshman in college called College Reading and Study Skills. And it just changed the way that I studied. I was fortunate enough to do very, very, very well in college. But here's the challenge. I get to law school. And Matt, that saying you go from a big fish in a little pond to a little fish in a big pond. Well, I may have been all that in a bag of chips in El Paso, but when I got to St. Mary's along with 291 other students in my first year law class, I was not a big fish. And so I remember distinctly a couple things. One, I start law school. Now I'm the first lawyer in my family. And about a month into the first semester, they say, okay, well, the finals are going to be X. And I'm thinking, okay, well, those are the finals. When are like the midterms and the tests? There were none. You took one test for each class and you took it at the end of the semester. So that was a shock. It was an all or nothing deal. And the second thing is, you didn't know how you did until about mid-February of the following year. This was before all the computer stuff. So I distinctly remember the professor said, if you'd like to get your grades early before we posted them, that's right, they posted them, Matt, for everybody to see. Give us a postcard with your address. And then let's say that you were my professor for contracts. I would just put my address on a note card, and on the back, I would put contracts. And then you would grade my test and I would get it. And I still remember living in the apartment complex that Liz and I did when we moved to San Antonio, walking downstairs to our the first floor and going to the mailboxes like apartments have, and opening up the very first postcard. And I got a 68. That's on 100 scale. And the hits kept coming.
Wow.
And after the first semester, out of 291 people, I think I was maybe 100 from the bottom, not 100 from the top, 100 from the bottom. And I said to myself, well, heck, I think I've got to retool. So that's when the Herbie and Gene sort of, you can do anything you want. You just got to grind. That's where it kicked in. And I was very fortunate enough to graduate much, much better than I started.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, no, that's intense. And you also mentioned in the book, which I was blown away by, just understanding how challenging law school can be. I work with a lot of attorneys. I have a very good friend who served 2 tours in Iraq, who told me that it was easier fighting terrorists than it was passing the bar exam. So just to give people an idea of how grueling this is. But you mentioned in the book that you and your wife had your first son in the middle of finals. It's your last year in law school, and you remember studying for the exam in the hospital library, which I was blown away by, again, understanding just how challenging this is. But I want to back up for a moment and talk a little bit about your wife, Liz, because she sounds like a saint. Based on everything I read.
Straight up is. You know, I tell people she may not walk on water, but she does not get the top of her socks wet. Let's just put it that way.
That's funny. So take us through meeting her. So you met her in school.
No, it was 1979. I'm working at Wiener Schnitzel, and her brother, Bob, was a friend of mine. He was a year younger. And then Liz starts working there. She starts working. And I said to Bob, hey, Bob, introduce me to your sister. And like any big brother would say, no, stay the hell away from my sister. So I kind of, just keep pushing at it and keep pushing at it and keep pushing at it. And then we start dating in 1979. And we end up getting married in 1983. Okay. In El Paso. Yeah. And she is, well, if anybody reads the book, really the book should be the woman behind the man in the ditch, because without Liz and without her steady hand through all this would have ended up much, much worse than it did. Sure. No, I was blown away just by the level of support she gave you through different challenges that we will absolutely get to in a moment. So, all right. So that's great. So I wanted to bring that up because I think sometimes people, they set different stages in their life where they say, all right, I'm gonna finish X, Y, and Z, and then I'm gonna do blank. And that's not part of your story. So you're getting married, you're having children, and you're going through law school during this process. So you never gave up on your dream. You are building a family while you're pursuing your dream. And that's something I really want people listening to grab a hold of, because I feel like we live in this hustle culture where people say, hustle here and don't buy a house, don't get married, don't have children until you do X, Y, and Z. And Mike, you and I are on the exact same page with this, that I believe that you can do both. You can pursue your dream. You can bring your children on as part of the process. You can explain goals to them and how to actually accomplish something and give back to the world and help people. So I really want to highlight that. So as challenging as that might have been, take us through that,
the support that you had from your wife, your children, going through school, landing your first job with the Texas Supreme Court. Take us through all that.
It's funny. I remember when we were started talking about having children, we had talked to numerous folks, and my wife is brilliant with numbers, and we were running the budget. And for anybody who has ever had children, they are just an absolute money pit. Let's just say it. They are incredibly expensive. And I remember an older friend of ours saying, if you want to wait till you can afford to have children, you'll never have them, which is true. And so that's one of the things that if you are planning your future and you say, when I get this, then I'll do that, I will tell you there's some danger in that thinking, because when you get to where you think you need to be, you are not going to have what you think you should have. And so putting off having children, if we would have waited, Matt, to be able to afford to have kids, we would have just had them like last year. So
last year.
I think it's important for folks to realize that. And I think it's also important to realize that we all live in a community, and it looks different for different people. But when Liz and I decided we were going to get married, and then we knew that I wanted to go to law school. I mean, this is a woman that worked 3 jobs while I was in law school, because your first year law school, they wouldn't let you work.
Wow.
And so I think it was that shared commitment to this is what we want to do. And then, as we ended up having kids, she was there because she was fortunate enough, at least after 2 years, to be able to stay home with them. But it was always one of those things that they were not mutually exclusive, if that makes sense, Matt. It wasn't that I was a lawyer, but I was also a father. It was, I'm a guy who's a dad and a husband, and I'm a lawyer too. And I think that if you are viewing the world as something that you can compartmentalize, I don't know if that really works. I'm all about work and home boundaries. I'm not saying that at all. But I think it's very important to build your community early, starting with your family, if that's how you're so inclined.
I cannot thank you enough for mentioning that you can absolutely pursue your dreams while having a family and being successful at being a father and a mother. That is extremely important for people to hear. So your wife is working.
Let me tell you, I'm not saying
Sure.
it is not easy. Let's be very, very clear about this. I know you're familiar with the author. I think her name is Carol Dweck. Is that it, with the growth mindset?
Okay.
We talk about these things, and these relationships are hard. This going to law school is hard. This having a podcast is hard. This doing the business you do is hard. And I think we have to acknowledge that and say that's simply part of the journey, and things will be difficult. And that's okay.
Sure. No, it is very difficult. You don't have to convince me of that. I'm well aware of that for sure. No, but it's awesome to see that. So your wife's working 3 jobs, helping you get through law school. You get through law school and you land a position as a briefing attorney with the Texas Supreme Court in Austin. And you had mentioned in the book that you were learning a lot about the Lone Star politics during this time. You're seeing different things you hadn't seen before. You're learning about negotiation. You're learning about all these different things. So take us through that, just some of the lessons that you learned working for the Texas Supreme Court.
Yeah. So just as a frame of reference, the Texas Supreme Court has 9 justices. And instead of law clerks, like you'll hear people say, well, they were a law clerk for a U.S. Supreme Court justice. They were called briefing attorneys in Texas, and they still are, BA, briefing attorney. And each judge would hire 2 of them. So there were 18 of us. And so, I went up and interviewed for the job, and they said, listen, if you come up and interview, you have got to commit that if we call you and offer you a job, you have to say yes. Otherwise, don't come up. So I go up and interview. I have an interview with these judges. I think it was probably 15 minutes, Matt. It seemed like an hour. And we never talked about law school, and we never talked about the law. We just visited. And the day after, or the following day, Judge Robertson's secretary, Bonnie Nemschke, I can still remember, calls me and says, the judge is inviting you to come work for him at the Texas Supreme Court. And so imagine you're a kid playing sandlot baseball, and, the Colorado Rockies call and say, listen, we'd like you to come up and pitch the first game of the World Series. And I'm just amazed. And I go in and tell my wife, or she got home, listen, I got it. We're going to Austin. I got a job at the Supreme Court. And the way I tell the story, she may tell it differently. She said, that's really great, but you need to take out the trash. So she was always grounding. But so I go up to Austin, and it's only a year gig. I mean, it's a 1-year gig. So you rotate in and you rotate out. And I learned a couple of things, really 3 things, Matt. First, you can never start building your community and your circle of friends too early. There are people that I met there in 1987 that I still talk with today, that I still rely on professionally today. And that was 1988. So you need to start that early. Second, I started to learn that so much of law is about relationships and building relationships with people. And the judges would talk freely about the lawyers involved in cases and what their reputation was and what they knew about them. And it was very much not like you would expect in a legal show where they are just talking about the law and precedent. They're talking about people they know. And the last thing I learned was, as a lawyer, if you submit something in writing, it is an absolute reflection of what the reader views your ability as. So if you submit something to a court or a client that's poorly written, you may be the smartest lawyer in the room, but the message is going to be you're an idiot. And so I learned the importance of putting out writing that was crisp and clean and got to the point. And to use a term one of my mentors said, just doesn't have a lot of wobble in it.
That's a really good point. That's a very good point. I also really appreciate it, you saying never start building your circle of friends too early.
Yeah, and these are people,
so
and let me tell you, these were, boy, I tell you what, you walk into a room and you realize you are not the smartest guy. There were people on this court that went to Berkeley, went to Harvard, went to Stanford. I mean, these were some real powerhouse law schools. And I was working among these incredibly smart people. And it was very humbling early on when I realized, wow, I am the least smart person in this entire room.
So then you're relying on friends and the relationships that you built.
Absolutely. To call and to go just wander down the hall and say, hey, man, I've run into this. Have you ever seen this before? And just to be in awe of people that are so smart and, more importantly, just really good people that were there to help you.
Sure. Wow. No, I'm sure a lot of lessons were learned there. And you said that it was a year. So then after this year, you end up working for one of the top civil defense firms in Texas. So take us through that a little bit. Take us through what it was like to land a position with one of these top firms.
Yeah. So the firm was Coles and Thompson, still is. I can see it as I'm giving this podcast. I can see the building downtown. And so and let me tell you the reason I was interested in Coles and Thompson. They had a very robust appellate section, and I would read a lot of the appellate briefs that their lawyers would put together. And I was incredibly impressed by their writing and just the work product they put out. I never had any desire to be an appellate lawyer. I'm not smart enough. I don't have the patience for it. But I was so impressed with that when the opportunity came up, I applied there. And I interviewed with them, and lo and behold, I got a job. And I was so fortunate enough to work at a young firm. I mean, the firm at that point, someone will probably correct me on this. When I joined in 1988, I think the firm may have been 5 years old, maybe 10. I'm not sure. So it was a new firm. And you were talking about working with some of the best and brightest people in the world. And I flourished there. It was an atmosphere that was good for me because you had all the responsibility you wanted. Now, I don't think that's for everybody, Matt. Some people don't go to the edge of the diving board and jump in and you'll be fine. That's how I learned, and it suited me just fine. But I've learned over the years, not everybody learns to swim like that.
For sure. Thanks for mentioning that. So I want to highlight something that I really want everyone listening to grab a hold of regarding your work with this law firm. And I'm going to bring it back to family. And the reason for that is because I feel like right now we're living in a culture where we're always talking about self and goals and ambitions. And I feel like a lot of times it's become socially acceptable to put our families on the back burner. And in the book, and this fascinated me, so I do want to dig into this a little bit. You said that you had a young family and you had a goal of leaving the office at 5:30 every day so you could be home for dinner with them. This meant heading to the office before the sun rose, long before the rest of the team was there. And also to paint the picture for people, you also mentioned in the late 80s, while this was happening with big firms, that basically you weren't really supposed to do this. The idea was you were never supposed to leave the office before your boss, leaving tons of young attorneys chained to their desks for 12, 14, and even sometimes 16-hour days. So take us through, you finally land this position with this big firm. You're in the process of accomplishing your goals from a career standpoint. You put your foot down and you say, no, I'm going to actually spend time with my family as well. Take us through what that looked like. Was it you're working harder, you're figuring out how to cut different frivolous tasks to kind of streamline the process so you can leave at a certain time? Take us through that.
So I will tell you, probably the smartest thing I did, and again, I learned this from my old man, was when I got there, I was assigned to a secretary. Her name was Wanda Nelson. It's 1988. It is August of 1988. And she had been there a long time, at least in my eyes. Remember, at this point, I'm 27 years old. So they assigned me to her, and I went out and said, Wanda, here's the deal. I don't know what I'm doing. I've never worked in a law firm, and you have. Can you make sure that I don't screw up? And can you tell me what I need to do well? And from that point on, she was my protector. And she guided me through do this and don't do that. Because you and I both know, Matt, there are written policies and procedures in every organization. And then there's the reality on the ground. And she helped me with the reality on the ground. The next thing I realized was, I wanted to spend time with my family. When did I want to do it? I'm a morning person. So I thought, well, why don't I get up early? Everybody's still going to be sleeping. And then I will be home in time every night to be with my family. And so I just made a decision that I would try to be at the office every morning by 5 in the morning. And by 5 or 5:30, I was out, hard stop, gone. Because when you started at that law firm, I wanted to know what are the expectations? What do you guys need me to be doing? How do I define success? And one of the things that anybody will tell you that's worked in the legal field and done what I do, it's the billable hour. That's one of the key metrics. And they said, this is what we are looking for from you in X period of time. And I said, okay. And so one of my goals was to make sure that I exceeded that expectation. So I was, usually at the office by 5 or so, and then leaving at 5 or 5:30. That was all well and good for me until a young partner came down to my office, and he sat in the chair across from me. And the way I remember the conversation was, yeah, listen, Mike, it's real important here that, you're a team player and that, we know that you're committed to the firm, and law is a lot of long hours. Yeah. And, it's kind of been noticed that at 5:30, you're generally gone. I said, yep. And he said, so we really kind of need to know that you're committed to the job. Now, I'm going to pause right there. This is at the time when young lawyers would drape an extra blazer, male lawyers would drape an extra blazer over the back of their office chair and just leave it. So if anybody walked by, they would think they were there. Or they would leave their dictaphone and everything out on their desk to look like they had just maybe gone to the restroom or gone and gotten a cup of coffee. So I'm probably 29 at this point, and I have some of Herbie in me. And what I heard was, you're not working hard enough. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, I'll tell you what. Now, this is dumb, and I do not suggest this for anybody new in their career. I said, okay, I'll tell you what. Here's what I'll do. I will stay as late as you stay if you get here as early as I get here. And until you agree to that, then I'm leaving at 5 or 5:30. If I'm not making my hours, someone come tell me, which is a stupid thing to say to a new partner in a law firm when, you haven't even made your bones. But that was kind of the tone I set because I still feel it today.
Sure.
Everybody works on a different schedule, and I was getting more work done than most people. And I really didn't appreciate what he was trying to say, but I could have handled it infinitely better, Matt.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. And what I find the most valuable in what you said that I think people could really take with them is you having a tremendous amount of humility to ask Wanda, hey, I understand here the written procedures, but take me through the reality on the ground. And I think that's really important for people to understand, and then also understand expectations. You had mentioned, the most important thing is billable hours. Once you know that, you can kind of shift and adjust to accomplish your desire of being home to have dinner with your family. So I really appreciate you taking us through that. So tell us about getting involved with trucking companies. You mentioned Chuck Green in the book, getting involved in trucking companies, and how that ultimately led you to connecting with Sam.
Yeah, so I started Coles and Thompson in 1988, and at first I'm slotted up in the medical malpractice section, so defending doctors and hospitals in medical malpractice cases. And I did that for about 6 months, and I realized, Matt, that those people I just didn't mesh with. And by that, I mean doctors. Of course, I didn't know anything about medicine, and I knew less about practicing law. But I remember really being talked down to, and doctors sort of wanting to make you feel inferior because you didn't understand the medicine. And I thought, this is not my gig. And so fortunately, Chuck Green, who would become my mentor, did a lot of trucking work. And I distinctly remember walking in one day and seeing a red rope and saying, "Hey, what's this?" He goes, "That's a trucking case. Do you want to work on it?" I said, "Yes." And then I went out to my first truck yard and I met with drivers in the driver's lounge. And I realized these are my people. No pretense, no airs about them, sort of rough around the edges, but really, really hardworking people. And I knew that I had found a place that I could really thrive as a lawyer. So that's how I get into trucking. And I'm fortunate enough, again, to work at a firm that if you made the effort and you were willing to go out there and do it, they let you do all sorts of stuff that unfortunately today, a lot of young lawyers don't get to do, Matt, simply because of the culture.
Okay. All right. So you find your people, you're really excited about this, and then ultimately you get connected to a gentleman by the name of Sam. So paint the picture for everyone listening on a little bit about Sam, who he is, what he's about, and your relationship early on.
Right. So I'm a 7-year lawyer. So it's 1994. And so I have left Coles and Thompson and I've gone on to work with a spinoff of Coles and Thompson. And let me just say right here, Jim Coles and his firm have produced some of the best law firms in Dallas that have worked there and gone off. I will not include my law firm in that, but there's a lot of others that have just done fantastic work. So I'm a 7-year lawyer. I'm at this new firm. And I get a call from essentially an insurance company that says, "Listen, we want to hire you on a new trucking case." I'm like, "Great." So I find out that my point of contact at the trucking company is the director of risk management, Sam. So he's the guy that when a trucking company gets sued, he interfaces with the lawyers. He's the one that manages the risk. And not only did he manage the risk for that trucking company, but the company he worked for was a holding company that I think had 5 or 6 other trucking companies underneath it. So imagine ABC Incorporated with 7 different trucking companies underneath it.
Wow.
So it was not a big case, Matt, but we did well. And so Sam started hiring us on other stuff. And as is often in your business, in my business, and anybody's business who is a relational business, if you did good work on little things, you get the bigger things. So we started to get hired more and more by Sam, which meant that I dealt more and more with Sam. So when you are interacting with somebody who is a client of yours and you're interacting with them on a pretty routine basis, you get to know them, especially if you're a people person. You just begin to know people. And so early on, I could tell that Sam was one of those hands-on clients. Matt, you have some clients that are very hands-off. Maybe some of our listeners have clients that are very hands-off and some that are very hands-on that want to be there with you and doing stuff. And Sam was a hands-on person. So if there was a big deposition, if there was a big mediation, if there was a trial, Sam was coming into town, which meant, if you've got a big mediation on a Thursday, he would come in on a Wednesday. We would go to dinner. I mean, it was just a chance to get to visit with him, get to know him, because here's a shocker. It's all about relationships.
For sure.
Period, full stop. So I get to know Sam. I mean, imagine having dinner with somebody 6 times a year. I got to know him. I got to know about his family. He got to know my family. I mean, he came out to my home and broke bread around my kitchen table with my family, even went to mass with my family. And I can tell you that in practicing 35 years, that's only happened one other time. One other time
Wow.
I've had a client in my home.
Wow. So you're building tremendous trust with this individual. Tremendous
Right.
trust.
I think, and in my mind, we've transitioned from, yes, always a client, but also a friend. That was what I thought it was, which is, of course, nirvana. Who doesn't want to work with their friends?
Sure.
And so I
Sure.
thought that's where we were.
Sure. All right. So you're building trust with this gentleman. You are still excited about working within the trucking industry. You are pursuing your passion regarding, all these different elements of law. You're enthralled. You're building this friendship, and then Sam sends you a box, and you end up opening a box. What was in that box that Sam, this individual that you trusted, gave you?
Right. So Sam was very gregarious and he was very generous. And so in 2012, let me see, in the year 2000, I believe, or 2001, I get a big box in my office and I open it up and it's full of Green Bay Packers memorabilia. We're talking signed footballs, team prints that have been signed, a couple jerseys. And of course, it was all for my sons because he knew my sons and he knew they would be excited, and there absolutely were. So I got it all out and looked at it, and I called him. I'm like, "Hey, man, thank you so much for this. The boys are just going to love it." He goes, "No problem. Happy to do it." And with Sam, that didn't surprise me at all. Matt, that he did this didn't surprise me at all. And he says, "Hey, by the way, I put something else. I put something in there for you. Did you get it?" And I'm looking, and I said, "No. I mean, there's two of everything." He goes, "No, look in the bottom of the box." So unpack everything. And there at the bottom of the box is an envelope. And in the envelope are 3 checks. And these are checks from trucking companies for whom Sam works, made payable to me on cases that I was not working on. So everybody here who is in the personal services or professional services world knows, the matters you're working on. And these cases were not for matters I was working on. And the checks totaled about $10,000. And I said, "Sam, I've got these, but there's a mistake, man." I said, "First, a couple things. One, nobody ever makes checks payable to me. They're payable to the law firm. And second, I don't recognize the names on any of these checks. These are not cases I'm working on." He said, "No problem whatsoever. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to take those checks and put them in your firm trust account, run them through your trust account, and then we'll split the money. I'll take 75%. You keep 25%. And I said, "That's not going to happen. I'm not doing that." He said, "No, well, the checks are made payable to you, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, here's what you do. Just go cash the checks. Just go cash them and give me the money." I'm like, "No, I'm not going to do that either." I said, "Sam, do you need me to lend you $10,000? I mean, this is how close I thought we were, Matt. Do you need me
Wow.
to lend you $10,000? Is there something going on? Is there, somebody sick?" He goes, "No." So I can't do it. So then his tone changes from the very conversational banter-like tone that you and I are having, and his tone changes. And he says, "Okay, here's my first. Is this an R-rated show or a G-rated show, Matt?"
Whatever you want it to be.
Okay, well, with caution to follow, I'll paraphrase. He said, "Okay, here's what you're going to do." Completely different tone. He goes, "You're going to take those checks and you're going to cash them and you're going to give me the money. And if you don't, I will pull every effing bit of business I have from you. And I will tell everybody in the transportation industry that you have lost your stuff." It was an ultimatum.
So basically, you are pushed with your entire reality can change. Things are finally going so well for you. You're building this supposedly friendship with this gentleman. So you're connected with him. He's very hands-on. You're very excited to be doing what you're doing. And then now basically you're told all this business is going to be pulled from you. This is going to negatively reflect with you, with the law firm, that they're going to lose out on all these billable hours. You might even be pressed to even work harder, which is going to take away from you being home and connecting with your family. So all of this is going through your head. Mm-hmm. So you essentially feel forced to do this.
Yeah, because at that point, as I remember, that business was probably about $500,000 a year. that Sam brought in. And remember, I was a named partner in the firm. And at that moment I was at a crossroads, Matt. The question is, do I say no, hang up the phone, call Sam's boss and say, here's the deal. Your director of risk is trying to extort me. And then I know we lose the business, at least in my mind. Or do I cash the checks, give him the money, shut up, and just hope it passes and get to keep Sam's business and get to keep his continued blessing in the transportation world?
So essentially you went with it and you cashed the checks.
Cashed the checks, gave him the money.
Cashed the checks, gave him the money. And for an entire year, nothing happened.
No, I mean, under naivete or a pipe dream, I thought it was all water under the bridge. Nothing was ever said. We continued to get work from Sam. We continued to try cases for Sam. We continued to get referrals from folks that Sam sent us. Oh, so on the surface, Matt, it was easy breezy.
Okay, so on the surface, but underneath, you felt it underneath.
Absolutely.
And then a year later, on January 16th, 2002, you get a call from Sam telling you that he's being investigated by the FBI.
Yeah, so the story goes, and this is all put together after the fact, they were doing an audit, as companies want to do sometimes, and they realized that something was wrong. And he said that they were doing an audit and the FBI was on to him. And it didn't take much for me to figure out where that was all coming. So on January 16th, 2002, I walked out of my law firm that I had helped build for the last time.
And you're, I'm guessing, feeling extremely panicked, very flustered, confused. Is that what you felt after receiving this phone call?
Yeah. Of course, I've never been in this situation, but imagine you're on an airplane and the pilot comes on and says, in 30 seconds, we're crashing. Ain't nobody living. You know that feeling that would be in your stomach? That was the feeling that was in my stomach as I drove home.
So you're on this, I can't even imagine how dark this drive home is. I don't care if the sun's up, it's a dark drive home. You're driving home with the understanding that your world is now about ready to crash, and you have to explain this to your wife. So you walk in the door, and what's going through your mind and regarding this conversation that you're going to have with Liz?
So let's be very clear. My world is blowing up because of my doing. I don't want anybody to ever read this book and think that I'm laying this off on anybody else. I made a decision. It was the wrong decision, and I own that. And so, I've got to go home and explain to Liz that I have just blown up our entire world. The law firm I helped found, the money that we make, the ability to have this house, the ability to live out here in the country, that's all gone because I have broken the law and done something illegal. And I got to tell you, Matt, even after 20 years, some conversations are still too raw to share. And that's one of them. I cannot,
Sure.
I just can't. But let's just put it this way. It was not my best day.
I completely understand that. Absolutely. So it's obviously a very frustrating, terrible time. And through it all, what fascinated me, and again, this is probably your upbringing and different things that you got from Herbie, you're still in the process of launching your law firm, the Bassett Firm, even while all of this is happening. So how are you able to push through and build a law firm as this whole situation's unfolding?
Well, it never would have happened if not for the 2 days after the fact, when this all blows up, that we are sitting in our living room and I'm sitting on the couch and I told Liz, listen, I'm just giving up. I'm throwing in the towel. Here, I'm going to lose my license probably. I'm probably going to federal prison. I'm just going to quit practicing law. And she looked at me and she said, here's the deal. You were meant to be a lawyer, and that is what you're going to do. You're going to practice law. And no hesitation in her voice. And 2 days after the fact, we started building what would ultimately become the Bassett Firm. And I think a lot of it, Matt, was just putting one foot in front of the other. You know, people will say it's a day by day thing. Bullshit. It's a minute by minute thing sometimes. And you just have to keep showing up and putting up every single day. But it never happens without a community. Had it not been for Liz, who is still the CFO of our law firm,
Wow.
and the people that stuck with me, it would have never happened. But it was a long, hard slog, my friend.
Sure,
Trust me.
sure. So you had tremendous grit. You're focused on being in the present moment. You're building your law firm. And just to give people background on the consequences, so you found out a year after launching your law firm that Sam is going to prison for embezzling over $1 million from attorneys and firms that represented his companies. So there's major consequences to what happened. What were some of your consequences, and take us through that and how you had to deal with them as you're building your law firm?
Right. So remember, this goes, the law firm opens its doors February the 4th, 2002. So we've just celebrated our 20th anniversary when we're having this conversation today. And so this is all going on in the background. I've got criminal lawyers and lawyers helping me with the state bar, because the FBI does come calling and the state bar does file a grievance. And so I've got not only criminal liability, I've also got the state bar looking to potentially punch my ticket and revoke my ability to practice law. So that is hanging over me every day. And like I say in the book, it's like getting up every morning and putting on a wool coat that's really wet and about a size too small. It was really just binding. You know, 1 minute I would think it was all going to go away, Matt. Everything was going to work out. And the next minute my stomach would drop and think I'm going to federal prison. I'll never see my family again. And so what ends up happening is I plead to one count in federal court, and I go out of town for the sentencing hearing up in federal court. And I've been in a lot of courtrooms in my life. This one looked about the size of a gymnasium or two, and the judge's bench was about 3 stories high, at least my perception. And I don't remember a lot about what happened in the hearing. I remember the shame I felt. I can still feel that in the pit of my stomach today. But I remember the judge looking down on me and saying, "Mr. Bassett, you made a grave mistake and you're going to pay for it. But do not let this mistake define you or your future."
Wow.
I still remember that. And so I was sentenced to 90 days in a halfway house. So from January of 2003 to April of 2003, I lived in a halfway house for 90 days. The state bar, there was 2 grievances filed, one by Sam's employer, the other by my old law firm. And I ended up with a public reprimand, which essentially was a published notice in the Bar Journal that I had been violated the rules. But the most important thing, Matt, was I would get to keep my license. So that is a miracle, truly a miracle. So yeah, within the course of about a year, 14 months, end up in a halfway house and go through a state bar hearing.
Wow. So you're in a halfway house as you're building your law firm, dealing with tremendous stress, tremendous frustration, still getting incredible amounts of support from your wife and children, pushing through. You're still accomplishing your goals, but also going through this absolutely horrific experience, which we don't have really a lot of time to dive into all the different emotions. That's why I highly recommend everyone check out the book. You can order it on Amazon. Again, it is by far the best, most riveting book I've read this year. It is phenomenal. So highly, highly recommend it. I remember, like I said, reading it in one sitting. And if I was in Hollywood, I would make a movie of this book. I really would, because there's so many emotions that take place, and you take your readers through this incredible journey. And it was just absolutely phenomenal to understand all the ins and outs of what you're going through, being in this halfway house as you're building your dream. So I recommend people check it out. I also very much appreciate this conversation, Mike. I really do. I got a ton out of it. I just want to go through 5 things that I got out of it, and then we will wrap up our time together. I really appreciate you mentioning about pursuing your dreams while focusing on family. I think that's a huge, valuable point. You also mentioned you can never start building your circle of friends too early. Extremely important. I also appreciate the humility that you brought to the table, asking Wanda, all right, here are the written procedures. What's really happening on the ground? I think that was extremely powerful. And also to take responsibility regarding our actions, take responsibility regardless of the challenges, and also the sheer grit and being in the present moment. That's what I took, the 5 takeaways I got from this conversation. So again, I highly recommend people check out the book. And Mike, also, where's the best place people can connect with you to hear more about the Bassett Firm, some of the things that you're doing right now in business?
So the Man in the Ditch website is themaninthe.ditch.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. You can go to our website, thebassettfirm.com, link to me there, and you can email me directly. And, you know, Matt, here's the one thing I would like folks to understand and take away, and that is this, that in life's journey, and if we are pushing forward, there will be potholes. Some will be bigger, some will be smaller. Some we can step over, some we step in and are up to our neck in mud. That is going to happen. I don't want anybody to ever forget that we have the power to choose how we are going to deal with those. And I think at the end, I would like everybody to remember we have the power to let those ditch moments, let those moments where the bottom falls out, to be a catalyst for raw and radical transformation, to make us a better version of ourselves, and not, Matt, bitter and small people living in the past. It's not who we're called to be.
That is so powerful, so powerful. I appreciate you mentioning that. And another thing that we don't have time to touch on now is just the victory that happened after this experience that people can find in this book. It was so empowering to me, taking me through this journey, through reading this book, and then also all the victories that came. And it was phenomenal. So thank you so much for putting this book into the world. Thank you so much for this conversation. I very much appreciate it.
Matt, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on today.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you have a story that you would like to share, feel free to drop an email to matt@mattzaun.com with the subject line Stories with Traction. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I share tons of resources on how you can be a better storyteller. Remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.